Why did you delete that message from your phone? I saw it before it disappeared.
What message? You're crazy. You always imagine things that aren't real.
I, I'm sure I saw it.
You need to chill. You're stressing over nothing.
Have you ever been in a situation like this? Maybe during an argument with your partner, you tried to bring up something you saw or felt, but their response left you so shaken you started questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Am I the problem here? This isn't just a casual disagreement, it's a textbook example of one of the most common forms of emotional manipulation, gaslighting. The scariest part, it can be so subtle you don't even realize it's happening. It might start with simple phrases like, "You're overreacting," or "That never happened," but over time, these words become weapons, undermining your confidence, making you doubt your reality, and even questioning who you are. Today, we're gonna break it all down together. I'll show you how to spot the signs of gaslighting, uncover the 5 most common phrases manipulators use, and explore the behaviors that fuel this toxic dynamic. Most importantly, I'll help you understand how to protect yourself and take back control of your mind and emotions. Could it be that the real issue in your relationship is hiding behind these seemingly harmless words? Let's find out. You are crazy. This phrase might seem simple, but it's one of the most powerful tools in the gaslighting playbook. When someone says, "You're crazy," the goal isn't just to shut down the conversation, it's to completely flip its dynamic. That phrase directly attacks your perception of reality, making you seem irrational even when you're raising a legitimate concern. Why would someone do this? In most cases, manipulators use this tactic for 2 main reasons: to avoid accountability and to maintain control. When you bring up something that bothers you, whether it's suspicious behavior, toxic actions, or even a minor disagreement, the manipulator feels the need to deflect. By saying, "You're crazy," they make the issue about you. They don't have to explain, justify, or acknowledge anything. It's your fault, or more precisely, the fault of your imagination or paranoia. This phrase is also a tool of control. By making you doubt yourself, the manipulator weakens your ability to trust what you see, feel, or think. This creates an emotional dependency where you start looking to them for validation that should come from within you, and the impact, it's devastating. Over time, repeatedly hearing "you're crazy" can erode your self-confidence. You start questioning your memory, your perceptions, and even your feelings. You might find yourself thinking, "Am I overreacting? Am I really that difficult?" And in many cases, this self-doubt silences you. You may avoid confronting the manipulator, convinced that you're being irrational, which only reinforces the cycle of manipulation. So how can you spot this pattern in a relationship? A key indicator is repetition. If you notice that every time you bring up an important issue, the response is something like, "You're crazy, that's all in your head," or "You're overreacting, that's a red flag." Another clue is the tone used. Often this phrase is delivered with sarcasm, laughter, or a condescending attitude. It doesn't just dismiss your feelings, it makes your concerns seem ridiculous or insignificant. How should you respond to this manipulation? First, trust yourself. The manipulator wants you to doubt your reality, but your perceptions are valid. If something doesn't feel right, that's reason enough to question it. Respond firmly with something like, "I know what I felt, and I'd appreciate it if you took this seriously." It can also help to document situations. Writing things down or sharing them with someone you trust can make it easier to recall details later, so you're not relying on the manipulator's distorted version of events. Above all, set clear boundaries. Let it be known that phrases like "you're crazy" are disrespectful and do nothing to solve the issue. You can say something like, "That comment isn't fair to me. Let's focus on what really happened." But "you're crazy" isn't the only gaslighting tactic out there. There's another one just as harmful and just as common: completely denying that something ever happened. And when that happens, the damage can cut even deeper. "That never happened." Completely denying someone's reality is one of the most effective forms of gaslighting, and the phrase "that never happened" is a textbook example. This tactic doesn't just derail the conversation, it strikes at the victim's most vulnerable point, their memory. Imagine you're recalling a clear event, something that was said, done, or promised, and when you try to discuss it, the response you get is, "I never said that. You must be confused." At that moment, the manipulation hits a whole new level. It's not just about deflecting or minimizing minimizing your feelings. It's about erasing the reality of what actually happened. Why do manipulators do this? Because this tactic shuts down any possibility of dialogue or confrontation. By denying a fact, the manipulator absolves themselves of all responsibility and makes you seem irrational for insisting. Even more, they know that by repeatedly denying the truth, you might start doubting yourself. It's a form of emotional and psychological control that makes the victim dependent on the manipulator to determine what is real and what isn't. And the impact, it's deeply disorienting. You begin to ask yourself, did that really happen? Am I getting things mixed up? This constant self-doubt weakens your confidence in your own memory and perception, creating a sense of confusion that can lead to emotional isolation. After all, if you can't trust yourself, how can you trust someone else to support you? This manipulation also changes the way you handle conflict. Many victims eventually stop trying to address issues, believing that pressing a matter the other person denies will only lead to more frustration. Over time, this creates a pattern where the victim becomes silent while the manipulator gains more and more control over the relationship. So how can you tell if "that never happened" is being used as a manipulation tool? Pay attention to how it's said. If every time you bring up a specific event, the manipulator emphatically denies it, even when you're absolutely sure it happened, that's a red flag. Another clue is a pattern of repetition. If the manipulator frequently rewrites or distorts events to avoid accountability, they're likely using this tactic intentionally. What can you do in response? First, trust your memory. If something is clear to you, don't let their denial erase what you know to be true. Statements like, "I clearly remember what happened," even if you deny it, can help reaffirm your perspective. It's also important to document situations. Writing things down or sharing them with someone you trust can reinforce your confidence in what's real. And just like with other gaslighting phrases, setting boundaries is crucial. Say something like, "Denying what happened isn't helpful. Can we discuss this more calmly?" This not only reaffirms your stance, but also steers the conversation back toward a space for dialogue. But "that never happened" is just one of many ways manipulators distort reality. There's another phrase that might seem harmless, but can have an equally devastating impact. "You are overreacting." How many times have you heard someone say "you're overreacting" when you're trying to express your feelings? At first glance, it might seem like an innocent comment, but it's actually one of the most common tools in the gaslighting arsenal. Over time, this phrase has the power to invalidate your emotions, dismiss your feelings, and subtly make you feel like you're wrong just for reacting. When a manipulator says "you're overreacting," they're not just rejecting what you're saying, they're downplaying your sense of what matters. Picture this: you're explaining why a certain behavior or situation hurt you, and the response you get is, "Oh, that? You're overreacting." It's not a big deal. When that simple phrase shifts the entire conversation, instead of creating space for understanding, it shuts down any chance for validation or empathy. But why would someone say this? The intent is often to divert attention. If the manipulator can make you believe you're overreacting, they don't have to take responsibility for their actions. Additionally, this phrase acts as a form of emotional control. By minimizing your reactions, the manipulator sets a pattern where only their feelings matter, while yours are deemed excessive or irrelevant. The impact, it can be devastating. Hearing "you're overreacting" repeatedly over time makes you start questioning yourself. Am I really overreacting? Is this even worth feeling upset about? Gradually, you might begin ignoring your own emotions, learning to silence your concerns to avoid conflict. The result? A cycle where you feel increasingly insecure and isolated while the manipulator retains control. Recognizing this pattern is crucial to breaking free. This phrase almost always shows up when you're trying to express something that genuinely bothers you. It's often delivered with a dismissive or impatient tone, as if your emotions are a burden. Another red flag is repetition. If every time you bring up an important issue, the response is that you're overreacting, it's time to consider how this dynamic might be affecting you. So how can you respond? First, remember that your feelings are valid. No matter what someone else says, what you feel matters. Respond firmly with something like, "It might not seem important to you, but it's important to me, and I'd appreciate it if you respected that." This affirms the legitimacy of your emotions without playing into the manipulator's game of invalidation. Another strategy is to give yourself permission to feel and process your emotions without fear of judgment. Sharing your thoughts with someone you trust, or even writing them down, can help you validate your feelings when they're being questioned. Finally, setting clear boundaries is essential. Say something like, "I don't think I'm overreacting, and I'd prefer we discuss this seriously. This shifts the tone of the conversation back to the real issue and challenges the manipulator's attempt to dismiss you. But gaslighting doesn't stop there. There's another phrase that works differently but is just as harmful, a phrase that normalizes bad behavior and makes you question your own values. Everyone does it. You're the only one who thinks it's weird. Everyone does it. You're the only one who thinks it's weird. This phrase might sound like an attempt to normalize a behavior, but in reality, it's a powerful form of gaslighting. When someone says, everyone does it, you're the only one who thinks it's weird. The goal is clear: to make you doubt your own values, isolate you emotionally, and shift the blame onto you instead of the questionable behavior being discussed. Imagine you're feeling uncomfortable about something. Maybe your partner flirting with others, spending excessive time on their phone, or keeping secrets. When you try to address it, the response is, that's normal, everyone does it. The problem is that you're making a big deal out of nothing. At that moment, the manipulator reframes your concern as a matter of perspective, or more accurately, your flawed perspective. Why do manipulators use this phrase? First, because it places you in a position of self-doubt. If everyone does it, are you really justified in feeling this way? This creates an opening for the manipulator to continue their toxic behavior without addressing your concerns. Additionally, it's a way to deflect responsibility. By framing the issue as your values or worldview being the problem, the manipulator avoids having to explain or change their actions. The impact of this tactic runs deeper than you might think. Over time, you may start questioning whether your feelings or beliefs are truly valid. This phrase creates emotional isolation, making you feel alone in your perceptions. You might begin to wonder, am I being old-fashioned? Am I the one who needs to change? This can erode your self-esteem, leading you to accept behaviors that go against your personal boundaries. So how can you spot this manipulation in your relationship? This phrase often surfaces when you try to voice something that conflicts with the manipulator's interests. It's usually delivered with a tone that minimizes your opinion, as if you're out of touch with reality. Another clue? It's rarely supported by solid arguments. The manipulator doesn't explain why everyone does it. They just use this vague claim to shut down the conversation. Responding to this kind of manipulation starts with validating your own feelings and values. Just because the manipulator says something is normal doesn't mean you have to accept it. Respond clearly with something like, that might be normal for others, but it's not something I'm comfortable with. This statement reaffirms your position and keeps the focus on your boundaries, rather than letting the manipulator shift the conversation. It's also important to remember that boundaries are personal. What works for one couple might not work for another, and that's completely okay. Set your limits confidently without feeling pressured to conform to someone else's version of what's normal. But this isn't the only phrase used to distort your emotions and deflect responsibility. There's another one that's even more subtle, yet just as powerful in invalidating your feelings. You need to calm down. You're stressing over nothing. Let's unpack how this tactic works. You need to calm down. You're stressing over nothing. This phrase is a classic example of emotional manipulation disguised as advice. At first, it might sound like an attempt to help, an invitation for you to calm down, but in reality, it's a subtle form of gaslighting that invalidates your feelings and completely shifts the focus of the conversation. Imagine you're trying to explain why a situation upset you. Maybe someone was late, broke a promise, or acted in a way that hurt your feelings. The response you get is, you need to calm down, you're stressing over nothing. It might sound gentle, but what this phrase really does is minimize your experience and shift the blame to your emotional state, as if you are the problem. Why do manipulators use this phrase? In many cases, the goal is to shut down the conversation before it even begins. If you accept that you're overreacting, the manipulator doesn't have to address what they did or the impact it had on you. Additionally, it's a way to deflect attention from the real issue. Instead of discussing what happened, the focus shifts to how you're reacting, and suddenly the real conflict disappears from the equation. The impact of this manipulation can run deep. Over time, you might start internalizing the idea that your reactions are always too much. You may begin avoiding conversations about your feelings altogether, fearing judgment or dismissal. This doesn't just silence your emotions, it can create a cycle where you begin doubting what's valid or important to you. So how can you tell when this phrase is being used manipulatively? Pay attention to the context. This phrase almost never appears in an empathetic or collaborative discussion. Instead, it's often delivered with an impatient, condescending, or dismissive tone. If you notice that every time you try to express something meaningful, the response is an invitation to relax, it's likely part of a gaslighting pattern. Responding to this manipulation requires firmness and clarity. You can say something like, I understand that you think I'm overreacting, but this is important to me, and I'd like us to take it seriously. This response reinforces the validity of your emotions and shifts the focus back to what really matters. It's also essential to validate your own feelings, write them down, reflect, or talk to someone you trust. Doing this can help you rebuild confidence in your perceptions and reactions. Gaslighting operates in the subtext, in phrases that seem small but carry a profound emotional impact. Recognizing these phrases and behaviors is the first step to breaking the cycle of manipulation and regaining confidence in who you are. And that starts with understanding that your emotions are valid even when someone tries to convince you otherwise. If you've been paying attention to each of these phrases, you might have noticed a pattern. They all have something in common. They're not just isolated words, they're strategies. Strategies designed to shift the focus of the conversation, avoid addressing the real issue, and most importantly, make you question your own emotions and perceptions. These tactics aim to take the responsibility off the person who caused the situation and place it squarely on you. Instead of dealing with the impact of their actions, the manipulator shifts the spotlight to how you're reacting, how you're seeing things, or how you're supposedly wrong. The most dangerous part, the more this happens, the more you start to internalize these ideas. But here's what's most important. Your feelings are valid, your perceptions are valid, what you feel matters, and no one has the right to twist that to avoid accountability for their own actions. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking the cycle of manipulation. Now that you understand how these phrases and behaviors work, use that knowledge to protect yourself. Trust your intuition, and don't let anyone make you doubt who you are or what you feel. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you know someone who might be going through a similar situation, share this video with them. This information could be the first step in helping them see the truth and take back control of their life.